Hi Stitchers, welcome to Tatreez Talk, where we share conversations about Palestinian embroidery. I'm Lena, here with my co-host Amani, chatting with talented embroiderers and artists, sharing their stories, inspirations, and the cultural significance behind their work.
On today's episode, we are chatting with Jenin, a Tatreez artist and educator. Jenin, we are so happy to have you here. Thank you so much for being with us. Welcome to Tatreez Talk.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Jenin, we love talking to fellow Tatreezers that we see on the gram, so it's super exciting to hear your story live. Can you kick us off by telling us a little bit about you and your family's connection to Palestine?
Of course. So my name is Jenin, but I'm not from Jenin. I'm actually from everywhere but Jenin. Although I love Jenin and I've been to it, alhamdulillah, everybody's so disappointed when I tell them I'm not from Jenin, but it's okay anyways. So both my parents are half Liddawi. And for those who don't know, Lid is about 40 kilometers away from Ramallah. So that's half of me because my parents are both half Liddawi. And then I'm a quarter Nabilsiya. I love Knafi too much to not claim that Nabilsi side. And then I'm a quarter Khaliliya. So my grandma on my mom's side is from Al Khalil. And she's actually from Dar Al Hirbawi. So she's related to the Kofiya people, which is really cool. So it's like, how can I not claim them too? So but most of my family is actually in Ramallah. So my mom's side of the family got internally displaced and now they're in Ramallah. So we're really all over the place, even within Palestine. And I have connections to all these different cities, but no connections to Jenin, unfortunately. Not yet. And a lot of my family did get displaced to Ramallah. In 1948, they got displaced from Lid. But I also have a lot of relatives that also got displaced to Amman. So my dad's side of the family, their migration journey is a little bit more extensive than my mom's because my mom's was more internally displaced within Palestine, but my dad's was like from Palestine to Jordan to Kuwait, back to Amman, and then my dad immigrated here to North America. So alhamdulillah, I had the privilege, me and my siblings, we lived in Palestine when we were younger. So I lived there during middle school. We lived in Ramallah, and that was such an incredible experience. Like growing up as a kid, a lot of my childhood was cartoons and then Al Jazeera, and it was this or that. And the only images we had of Palestine was unfortunately Al Jazeera, and that's not a good way to be introduced to your country as a child. And your first images and videos of Palestine being when there were, like clashes or riots or anything happening, and seeing your people only through the lens of being oppressed, and then seeing Palestine through that narrative. So I grew up with the mentality and the idea, and that image, I should say, of just like Palestine being just like this like dark, gloomy war zone. And it wasn't until we went to Palestine for the first time in the 6th grade, we crossed from Amman into Palestine. We were in Ariha, and I saw all of the hills, and immediately in that first second, I was like, okay, I'm home now. I don't really know how to explain it besides that. Like, you just really felt so connected to everything. And I'm like, this is not gloomy. In fact, I don't even see a cloud. Like, it's all sun, beautiful hills, beautiful nature. I just felt so connected. Even though I was only in the 6th grade, I felt so connected to the trees and to the earth and to the sky. And just being there was so incredible. Alhamdulillah, we lived there for 3 years. And you're exposed to a lot of things when you live in Ramallah, when you live in the occupied West Bank. A lot of things that either you never could have ever imagined or ever wanted to imagine. And I have vivid memories of being in middle school and being like walking through these checkpoints with my parents and not really being able to fathom what was happening until like I grew up, and like 10 years later I was like, wow, that really happened, I'm not going to get into all those stories because there's a lot, but like I have very vivid memories of like getting smuggled into Jerusalem because my mom spoke fluent Hebrew, and we really wanted to go to it's like, who wouldn't, right? And we were living in Ramallah, so without the checkpoint it would be half an hour, but with the checkpoint it's like too long of a journey. That's all I'm going to say. So we would like get smuggled on through these like settler buses. So we would just smuggle in with them and just like kind of camouflage to the best of our ability. And I remember this one time we went, and my younger brother, he was only 2 years old, and he was learning how to speak. And he was learning how to speak in Palestine, so all he spoke was Arabic, not even English. And we were on this bus, and we get on there, and it's filled with IDF soldiers, and they're all armed. They're either going to training or they're coming back from it. We were the only non-soldiers on that bus, and we were sitting all the way in the back seat. And my older sister had my younger brother on her lap, and we were all so scared that if my brother says anything, because, you know, like little kids, especially when they're toddlers, they point out like trees and they'll say shajara, or they'll say like sama, or they'll say siyara, or they'll say all these words. And we were so afraid that he was going to open his mouth and say something, because like very easily things could turn bad. So that's just like one of the many memories that I have living in Palestine. So we lived there for 3 years, then we came back. By back, I mean Canada. I was born and raised in Canada. I probably should have mentioned that. But yeah, I was born and raised in Canada, and I grew up in a community with a lot of Arab, but not a lot of Palestinians. And we moved back from Palestine to Canada, and I've just been there ever since. Up until last year, I moved here to the Chicago area, so I'm in like the Chicago area. And it's so beautiful to be in a community so close to Little Palestine. It's about like a 15-minute drive from where I live right now. And it's so nice to be with my people. I don't really know how to explain it besides that. But just being in that community with fellow Palestinians, especially since October, it's like collective grief, but collective healing. And in so many ways, there's so many spaces for us to like gather and not even have to express ourselves through our words, because we all already know how we all feel. So you don't have to compensate or overcompensate for your silence or for your over explanation, because everybody's feeling it to the same extent and to the same magnitude. So that's where I'm at right now. I live in Chicago now, and yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that you're like, I'm from everywhere in Palestine, except for Jenin, of course. But but like, I love the Palestinian representation just within you. It's amazing. So that's really interesting that you guys, your family went back for a few years. I know you said it was like 3 years. What brought you guys back to Palestine? Like, what was that? Like, what was the overall experience of like growing up in Canada, then going to Palestine at like this like very like, I guess, formative age, right? And then going back to Canada again, like shortly after. It seems like a little bit of whiplash.
Yeah, it was wild. Well, we first of all moved to Palestine because one of my grandfathers was sick at the time, so we were gonna take care of him. So that's why we were there. And I grew up in like a very white suburb in Canada, and I didn't really know any other Palestinians. I was one of the only Arabs in my whole school, and I always kind of felt like we were different. And then relating this to Tatreez, I have like very vivid memories of being a child, even in the 1st and 2nd grade. So in Canada at the time when I used to go to like elementary school, they used to do a cultural show and tells. So like my school wasn't that diverse, but it was kind of diverse. So it was a show and tell, but my mom always made it cultural. So I know Amani in like the first episode, she was saying she's so aggressively Palestinian, and so is her family. So is mine. I remember being like a little like 5-year-old kid on like in the 1st grade, and my mom was like telling me and my sisters, "Isma'u, رح أعطيكم هذا الثوب. لما يجي دوركم, you're gonna go up." Like basically in English, like I'm gonna give you guys this thobe. When you go up and you're gonna present, you're gonna teach people about Palestine through this dress. And sometimes she would make mu'ajjanat, so she would make like spinach pies and za'atar pies, and like I remember she would like hang it up in like, you know, the dry clean bags, how it's like clear, so it's like not even dust comes on it. And we had a few handmade thwab that my mom really cherished. So like when it was our turn to present, and on those days, me and my sisters, we would take that thobe and we would like be very delicate and very gentle with it, as if it was like a newborn baby. And we would always like teach our class, even though we were like in elementary school, we were like in the 2nd and 3rd grade, teaching our class about what Palestine is, where Palestine is. And it was like really sad being a child, and everybody's like, they can point to a map and be like, that's Palestine. But as a child, like Palestine's not written on the map, right? So we would have to show them through so many different artifacts culturally our existence and our presence. And that was like my first ever interaction with Tatreez, was being a young child, teaching all these kids from so many different backgrounds what Tatreez was and what Palestine was through this one dress, and through something as simple as za'atar that we don't even think about because we eat like every day almost. So I remember just thinking like, okay, this is very special for some reason. I didn't realize. And then it wasn't until like I grew up that I was like, okay, you know what? Tatreez is actually really very beautiful, and I could practice it too. Like if everybody else could do it, I could do it too. And I was like, I think 19 or 20 at the time, and I was working at an organization, a nonprofit organization, where they would have every Friday afternoon, they would have like knitting circles, So all these like women, like immigrant women, refugee women, elderly women in the community, they would get together, and it was women only, and they would just work on their current projects. So it was like kind of like a Tatreez circle, but it was like, it could be anything. People were doing crochet, people were doing knitting.
Yeah.
And I was taught
Any
how
kind
to
of
knit.
stitching.
Yeah. And I loved it because I would go during my lunch breaks there and I would join them. And I just had such a great time and I loved it. And it was so beautiful and so diverse to just connect with like women from Congo and then women from like Palestine and women from Lebanon and women from like Iraq and all these like different people that can't even speak the same language, but they're teaching each other different techniques through their craft. And I learned how to knit in that group with like this one this elderly woman. And from there, I got into crochet. I didn't really like crochet too much. I'm sorry. It wasn't my cup of tea. But that led me to exploring Tatreez. And it wasn't until like the very beginning of COVID that I was like, you know what? I've done a lot of knitting projects. I want to do something else that's not knitting or crochet. Like, I don't want to work with yarn anymore. I want to work with something different. So I was like, I really love Tatreez. I just love admiring it. I love seeing it like decorate our walls and decorate our homes, whether it's a pillowcase or a tapestry or whatever it may be. And I was like, you know what? I want to learn. So this one day I walked up to my mom, and I always share this story in my workshops. And I went up to my mom, like, Mama, I want to learn how to do Tatreez. And she said, Dabri halik. So, dabbarit hali. Dabri halik means figure it out yourself or do it yourself. So I did it myself with the help of like a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of tutorials on YouTube, a lot of just videos of how to do embroidery. I didn't even know I wasn't doing cross stitch. Like, I was just watching any video and I was just practicing. I didn't even know what to buy. So I went to Michael's before we started boycotting. But I went to Michael's. I didn't even know what to do because I would only go to Michael's for yarn and for like knitting needles. And then I was in this whole other aisle. I was like, wow, they actually have a lot of like Tatreez stuff. Like, these needles are really small, like compared to obviously the knitting ones. But I was like, okay, I just picked out the first thing I saw. I didn't know what I was picking out. And I picked out this like 6-strand floss and like the 6-strand embroidery floss because that's all they had. They didn't have the cotton pearl. So I remember, and in the tutorials, they said, if you use this, you have to separate them. I don't know why it never crossed my mind to like cut yani up to my elbow or like even like an arm's length or something like of thread to use. So I had my younger brother at the time who was like maybe in the 7th grade. This is so embarrassing. Me and him, we would like split the thread like into 3s, and he would like walk to the other end of the house until like he couldn't walk anymore until like he reached the length of the house. And like he's like Jenin, I'm tired. I want to go outside and play. I'm like, hold on, we're almost done, and we weren't almost done because you know how many meters it is. And I just have like my first Tatreez memories are like me forcing my brother to just split the thread with me, and him having the worst time ever, and when I would do it, I would buy in bulk. So I would buy every single color. So we would just sit there for hours and hours just separating the embroidery floss.
Oh my God.
It's because I had no idea the cotton pearl existed. So I was just doing that for too long. Like I would say the first year, I made a lot of mistakes. I'm not even going to get started on like yani the embroidery floss. That was just one of the very, very, very many mistakes. And I would always go up to my mom and ask her for help. And she'd be like, "Shو بعرفني, like, بعرفش كيف أطرز. Like, I don't know how to do Tatreez. Like, don't come ask me for help. Like, figure it out yourself." So I had to continue to dabbir hali. And then I got it. And then it made sense. After a long while, it made sense. And I would sit there, and we have this house in like my family. We have this room in my family's house where like it's like there's a very big window, so we get a lot of natural light. So I would always sit there, especially during quarantine. And in Canada, it was a lot more intense than here in America. Like, we were in quarantine for like a solid 2 years, and you couldn't even go to the park down the street. Like, even if you were outside with like one other person in a parking lot and you were socially distancing, you could still get fined. So it was like very strict rules in Canada at the time. So there was really nothing else to do but to just sit there and do Tatreez, and that's exactly what I did. And then my younger sister, she would always see me. I'm 3 years older than her, so she would always see me do Tatreez, and she's like, "You look like you're having so much fun. What are you doing?" So she got a little intrigued, and I was like, "Tali, let me teach you." So I taught her, and she really loved it. She's like, "You know what? This is bringing me a lot of peace too. I really like it." But when she would mess up, shout out to my sister one time. I don't know if she's going to listen to this or not. I hope she does. But she would like sometimes get frustrated and be like, "You're not a good teacher. Leave me alone. I don't want to do this anymore." And she would like give up. And I would encourage her like, "No, stay at it. Just like every time you see me do Tatreez, come join me. I'll help you. I'll help you. I'll help you." And I did for the most part. When I had the energy and the patience too, I did. And then me and her, we just started doing Tatreez together, and we've been doing that for years. I love doing Tatreez in nature. I still do. If I can do it outside, I will. So I would like go on a bike ride like to the other side of my town and like sit under a tree and just do Tatreez for hours. And like there would be families coming up to me like, "What are you doing?" And I would tell them like, "I'm doing Palestinian embroidery. This is Tatreez." And I would show them, and they would hype me up like complete strangers at the park. And I was like, I took that hype because I was like, Yani, why not? You know, like I was a beginner, so I was like always humbling myself. And when I would make a mistake, I'm like, man, I should quit. But when you hear from strangers, it's different. So I continued to do Tatreez.
Yeah.
And it was fun. I really loved it. And then I would say, like last year, we visited Palestine. And before that, we went to Amman. And my dad's side of the family is in Amman. So my grandma's house doesn't have internet. But she has a lot of Tatreez supplies. So I picked up her Tatreez supplies and started to Tatreez. And when my amta would come over and my cousins, they'd be like, "Gee, what are you doing? You look like Teta." I actually do kind of look like my grandma. So it's like, we do kind of look like when we would sit next to each other, I would be doing Tatreez, but like her vision and her hands aren't like, they're not equipped for Tatreez. So she would like coach me. She would be like my little cheerleader. But like people would be like, "You look like Teta." Like my cousins, they'd be like, you look like Teta. You're just sitting over there doing Tatreez. And I was like, "You want to learn, don't you?" And they did. They just didn't know how to say it. So I taught them. I taught my cousins. I taught my amto. And then we would have like, all the time, whenever we would hang out, we would just sit there and just do our Tatreez together. We would just pick up a project and we would continue to learn. And that's when I realized, I was like, you know what? I really like teaching people. And like, I know how to do it. Why should I gatekeep that information and not teach anybody else? Even if it's just the people around me and like my loved ones. And then I really liked it. And then we moved here to North America, but we moved to Chicago. And I started teaching workshops here locally. And that's also around the same time I started my business. Tatreez Jenin that was like my introduction to Yani, really getting involved in the community and teaching the Chicago community how to do Tatreez to the best of my ability, and also catering it to like what they wanted to learn too. So I've had many opportunities to teach Tatreez in different places and with different people. Last month I did a workshop with the National Museum of Mexican Art, and we explored the Star of Beit Lahem motif, because they, in Central America and also in Mexico, they have the Star of Beit Lahem on a lot of their Tatreez pieces. So I would always see it, and I was like, you know what, this is, I wonder what the connection is. I'm not sure, but it's the same exact motif. Like, they do it and we do it, just on different ends of the globe. So it was very nice to have like people like Latinos and also like Palestinians in the same space, practicing the same art through the same motif. So it was very interesting. And
that's so cool.
Yeah, that's a little bit about like my journey to Tatreez, and also like how I started my business.
Jenin, I love your Tatreez journey, and it involves everyone in your family except for your mother. And I love your mother's response to you wanting to learn Tatreez. It's too good. It's too good. So, okay. So now you've taught your sister, you've taught some of your cousins, right? Like, have you taught your mom yet? Is your mom trying to learn, or is she like, she's good?
My mom is good. I think like she learned as a child, and then she was like, because my mom grew up in Palestine, and then she was like, you know what, I don't want to do that anymore. And my mom's the kind of person that like, she always has like a perpetual to-do list. So she's like, I don't have time to just sit down and just learn Tatreez. Like, and my mom's not really the most patient person, but I always tell her it will teach you patience. Tatreez really is a great teacher for many things, and patience is one of the many.
100%. Your mom sounds like my mom, because my mom is the same way. She's like, I don't have the patience to sit and do it. But I'm like, but you need to learn the patience to sit and do it.
It's always a
journey with moms. Right. Exactly. So, okay. So your Tatreez journey also like kind of spans from like a very young age to like when you decided to actually like pick up a needle and threads to start stitching, and now you're teaching. I'm curious, like with your evolution, like at these different points of your Tatreez journey, especially at these different points of like where you're living in the world and like with the communities that you've been a part of, like, can you kind of walk us through how that has like changed the way you Tatreez, or like the way you design and the way you like view Tatreez?
I feel like my appreciation for Tatreez has grown a lot, because when we first moved to Chicago, we lived in a predominantly Mexican neighborhood, and my husband's Mexican, by the way. I should have mentioned that. Like, I've always had a great appreciation for Central American and Mexican Tatreez, and it wasn't until like I actually lived in their communities and saw how they were selling their handmade Tatreez products, and whether it was like yani clothes or bags or whatever it may be, that I was like so drawn to the way they stitch. And I love their use of colors. I think it reminded me a lot of like Khalili Tatreez, because Khalili Tatreez is usually very colorful and it's usually on a darker fabric. Yeah, it's very vibrant. And I kind of get that same like vibe from Central American and Mexican Tatreez. So it's very nice to kind of see the similarities. And ever since I got married to my husband, I always thought about like making something kind of like a fusion piece between Palestinian and Mexican embroidery, not even just for our future children, but like just to have and like to create a tapestry and to design one that we can like decorate our home with, that like incorporates both Palestinian and Mexican embroidery. Because Mexican embroidery is not only cross stitch, they do like the traditional embroidery, very floral, and they like it's very full. I don't know how to explain it, but it's just very full. Like you don't see the gaps, you don't really see the fabric that's behind it. So that's something that I've been thinking about for a while now. I just don't really know how to like implement it. There's a lot of Tatreez resources for Palestinian Tatreez. I haven't found enough about Mexican embroidery, like whether it's books or like videos or tutorials and stuff. But if anybody knows of any, please send them my way. I would love to learn more about that.
Ooh, yeah, that would be interesting. I'm wondering, now I'm like thinking, I'm like, I wonder if there are any like local, because I'm in California, and I'm like, I wonder if there's any like local resources like within the Mexican American like art community too out here. But I know what you're talking about. Like every time I go to Mexico and I stumble in a store that has beautiful dresses with like Mexican embroidery, I'm like, oh, I fall in love, because I love the vibrancy. I also love Khalili Tatreez because of how vibrant the designs are. So I can definitely relate.
It's so pretty. I love colors. Like especially like a lot of colors. Some people think it's like too much. Yani the Khalili style thwab in comparison to the other ones, but like the Khalili and the Sabawi, like the Bedouin thwab, are some of my favorite thwab in Palestine because of how many colors there are, and they're not traditional. Like they'll put two very contrasting colors right next to each other, and it doesn't diminish one. It actually just like kind of emphasizes both and highlights both to the full extent that yani it's like the design itself is already beautiful, but the colors just enhance the beauty even more. So like Central American and Mexican Tatreez is so beautiful because it's so colorful, and it reminds me so much of Palestinian embroidery, specifically from like the regions of Al Khalil and the Bedouin regions as well.
Jenin, this is so cool because, I mean, as someone who's half Latina, I'm obsessed with this concept of fusing the two cultures through an embroidery lens. Is your husband's family at all practicing embroidery or some sort of needlework at all?
You know what's really interesting is they're from the north of Mexico, so they do different types of like art, but Tatreez is more practiced in central and southern Mexico. So every time we would go visit his family, because they're in a different state, so every time we would go to that state and I would wear my handmade Tatreez, there would be that same deep appreciation for the thobe that I have on, and they would intricately look at it and then look on the inside of it. So they would like flip over so they know they know what they're doing, and like they really look very closely. Yeah, all the tias, and even like some of like his cousins too, they look at it and they're like, oh my god, I see that, that animal, or I see that flower, or I see that tree, and they can identify it even if they don't practice it, which I love because it's like a shared appreciation for the same art. Even though like I know, Amanda, you were just saying like walking into a store with like Mexican like Tatreez is so overwhelming in a good way. And they kind of feel the same way when I wear it. And there's also like some khaltas that come up to me, even like when we used to live in the Mexican neighborhood a couple months ago, they would come up to me when I would wear like a thobe, and they would ask me questions. And I could get by in Spanish, but when it gets too advanced, khalas, like I need my husband to interject and like start translating. But like but I like it because it's kind of a conversation starter. 100%. And like there were so many different times I would be wearing my handmade thobe, and some khaltas, like not khaltas, but some tias would come up to me, like older women, like somebody's grandma, they'd come up to me and they would ask me like, embordado a mano, like, is it handmade? And I would be like, yes. And they would be like, where are you from? ¿De dónde eres? And I would always say, I'm from Palestine. And immediately they would stop and they would put their hand on their heart, or they would like want to hug me. And they would say in Spanish, like, we support you guys. It was like some of the greatest experiences that I've had living there was the support, like the solidarity that I saw from the Latino communities, our own neighbors, actually. Like this one time, this lady came up to us and she was like asking us where we were from, because I had Tatreez on, and we told her. And then she's like, in Spanish, she was saying, we support Palestine, and ever since October, I've told all my kids to boycott McDonald's and to boycott Starbucks, and they were eating that every day. And it was so random. And she's like, yeah, every time we watch the news, our heart breaks, and we continue to pray for you guys, and we have so much love and appreciation for your guys' resilience in Palestine, and we support you guys. I want you to know that. So it was like, they kind of went above and beyond, and they really wanted me to feel that solidarity and that support, which was actually initiated through Tatreez. Because had I not worn Tatreez, they would have just thought I'm just another Arab, which I am Arab, but like I'm specifically Palestinian. And the fact that they can allow that to be the conversation starter, I'm so glad it is. And even among other communities, not just Latinos, like whether it's the Desi communities or like non-Arab communities in general, coming up to me and like being intrigued by my Tatreez and asking me whether it's a thobe or a purse or something else that I have. It's very beautiful to be able to teach people about Palestine through Tatreez.
I love that Tatreez is this like conversation starter with your local community, your neighbors in Chicago. So that's amazing. I always talk about the fact that like I'm a very big believer in the fact that Tatreez is an art form, like a true art form. And, you know, I think this is not unique to me. I think everyone talks about the fact that like art is this like very universal language. So the fact that, you know, people could see your Tatreez and feel comfortable, whether it is your neighbors seeing what you're wearing, or even when you were talking about like sitting underneath a tree and stitching and it being a conversation starter with people. I love that sentiment. And how have you kind of taken that now? And like, I know you're working on building community, you're educating and stuff, you're teaching Tatreez. How have you kind of taken Tatreez as a conversation starter to like start conversations within your own like new local Palestinian community?
I've been using Tatreez to educate my community about Palestine, not just since October, but I don't think there's enough education about who Palestinians are in general. So I allowed Tatreez to be the medium by which I teach people who we are and about our identity, and more so even about our indigeneity. So I forgot to mention this, but part of what really drew me to want to learn Tatreez and like really motivated me was when I was in university doing my undergrad, I was a part of the Native Student Alliance, and I would spend a lot of time with like indigenous Canadians. And I know Canadians, that's not even the right term for them, but the First Peoples and the First Peoples, indigenous peoples from that region that we were living in Canada. And I learned a lot about them and also about what it meant to be indigenous, and the way they did it through their artwork was very beautiful. So I would attend different events and I would see the women dress in their cultural clothing. And when they would have these like, I'm not really sure the term, but like all these women would gather in a circle and then they would do this kind of like dance. And it's like they were wearing skirts, but the skirts had a kind of like an instrument on it. So they would kind of like jump up and down very lightly and it would make a noise and it would kind of make a sound. And they would all kind of like dance to that. And somebody would be like beating the drum. So from seeing that and then seeing them maintain their indigeneity through other forms like beadwork was very inspiring for me. And I was like, you know what? They do such a great job at preserving their identity and their indigeneity through their art. And then I started to reflect and I was like, that's very similar to Palestinians. Like my whole life, I never called myself Palestinian Canadian, and I never will. Even I'm not going to call myself Palestinian American because we inhabit these lands, but we are not from them. And it's very important to remember that our place here in this part of the world is temporary, and most of the time it's a product of colonialization, and it's a product of displacement and being exiled. And it's really important for us to remind ourselves that we are not from these lands, and the indigenous people of these lands, this land belongs to them, and we need to honor that, and we need to respect that. So even through our language, and language is so powerful, when we say things like I'm Palestinian Canadian, that's the same way as a settler in Ilid, for example, where my family's from, saying they're Israeli. They're not from Ilid, right? You can't even handle the sun. You're not indigenous to Palestine. You can't be indigenous to Palestine. Like, it doesn't make sense. The same way, like, if I'm gonna go around and start saying I'm Palestinian Canadian, I have 0% like indigenous Canadian blood in me, or like I'm not. My ancestors don't come from this part of the world, and that's it. So I was very inspired and very moved by them, and the way that they were able to like preserve their indigeneity, and that's kind of what really motivated me to look more into Tatreez. And then I also did my thesis in undergrad about the dehumanization and humanization of Palestinian lives and deaths. And I looked at it in a, I'm not going to get into the whole entire like research thing, but essentially just the hierarchy of life and death, and the way that Palestinians, even after they pass away, whether it's in Palestine, and depending on which region in Palestine too, their lives and their deaths are ascribed to a certain value, and they're also devalued. So I that was also very emotional for me to do, but also very important, because I kind of felt like, okay, like it was just a lot of things happening at the same time, and then very shortly after COVID started, and then I started learning Tatreez, so it was a very like condensed time in my life where it all just felt right for me to transition and start learning Tatreez. And now, a couple years later, after learning Tatreez and the basics and teaching my loved ones, I'm able to teach the Chicago community and the communities that invite me to teach outside of just Chicago and outside of Illinois. I've gone to different states and taught people Tatreez, which has been such a great experience. But here locally, allowing people to understand who we are, because Chicago has a very big Palestinian community, but that doesn't mean non-Palestinians know anything about us. Maybe they'll know what our food tastes like. Maybe they'll hear our music. Maybe they'll attend a festival where they're playing Ana Dami Falastini and they think, oh, hey, I know that song, or whatever, right? But we're a lot more than that, like so much more than that. And even the idea of what Tatreez is, to Palestinians, non-Palestinians, and so many other people, their basic understanding of that is machine-made Tatreez. And I always try to challenge that narrative, because that was made by a machine probably in China, right? It wasn't like, yani, if we were talking like 50 years ago, when they say Tatreez, you know there was a woman's hand making the actual Tatreez, and then probably another woman constructing the Tatreez, whether it's the manajid or a different part of the dress itself, because they would divide it oftentimes. So trying to educate people that like this was and always will be a labor of love. So when we practice Palestinian embroidery, we are doing something so beautiful and so unique. And also very, in my opinion, very intimate. When you choose to learn Palestinian embroidery, whether you're Palestinian or not, you are choosing to explore Palestine. And you might not know what it's like to be in Palestine, but those stitches in some way connect you to a land that you're either not in or haven't been to or want to go to. It was a very beautiful experience for me to start teaching people about who we are. And I'm still grateful like all the time to be able to teach people, because a lot of people don't know anything about Palestine, and it's so unfortunate, because it's like, or when I hear what people do know about Palestine, it's like very minimal, and it's like it's not enough. I'm like, we are people that have been around for so long, and we are so beautifully diverse, yet nobody knows anything about us. And I think Palestinians here in the diaspora have done a good job in terms of cuisine, of introducing that and letting people learn who we are through food. I think there's other forms of expressing who we are and our identity through different means, essentially.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I mean, I think like food tends to be one of those easy things like globally that people feel comfortable with, but I love that energy, and like Tatreez is only one of the many, many different parts of Palestinian culture to, you know, educate people on and to bring people into. So I love that energy.
Yeah, Jenin, this is so powerful. And I'm also, you know, one of the things that I've also realized through my own Tatreez journey is like you're saying, definitely the non-Palestinians, even if they are neighbors to Palestinians, are so unaware of so much of what makes Palestinians Palestinian. But I also find like the Palestinian community as well, and I think you mentioned this, like even amongst ourselves and amongst our own communities across the world, the Tatreez is associated with machine made. It's associated with like, you know, like refugee labor, like how we can support women empowerment and things like that. And like, that's not actually what it was historically. Like historically, it was just part of the just part of just being Palestinian. You didn't have to, it wasn't a thing that you turn to, you know, support people who've been displaced, or it's not something that you have to use to prove your Palestinianness. It was just part of who you are. And I think that's been something that's really driven me in my journey and kind of where I've landed now. So I'm curious about, like, you know, as you're teaching both Palestinians and non-Palestinians, what are kind of the biggest surprises that people learn through you about Tatreez, or what are some of the things that they, you know, are going to continue thinking about past that one workshop?
My goal in these workshops, whether I'm teaching Palestinians or not, is to start by unlearning. Before I teach anything, I start by unlearning. So when there's Palestinians, even if there's just one Palestinian in the workshop and everybody's like from different backgrounds, I always begin with like very basic assumptions that we usually have about Tatreez. Aside from the ones that you mentioned, Lina, which I'm very glad that you did, are like only Fallahis wear Tatreez, only Fallahis do Tatreez, only Fallahis preserve Tatreez and pass it down. And for those who don't know, Fallahis are people from villages. So it's like the villager versus the city people. And my family, they're Madani, like from every city we're from the city. We're not from the outskirts of it. Like, and
to be clear,
yeah. And people are like, wait, you're Madani and you're wearing Tatreez, you're Madani and you're doing Tatreez, you're Madani and you're teaching Tatreez. Like, I am just as much Palestinian as the Fallahis, as the Badawis, as everybody in between, right? And I have a claim to Tatreez the same way every other Palestinian does. Did my family, the generations before, practice Tatreez? Like, was that a common practice? My grandma on my dad's side, when she got exiled from Lid in 1948, they ended up in Ramallah. And in Ramallah, she learned the Ramallah style Tatreez from the woman in Ramallah. So the kind of Tatreez techniques and motifs that my grandma used to practice was from Ramallah, even though we're not from there. So even that has a story, right? So it's like, why does my grandma from Lid, who was born and raised there, know how to do Tatreez from a city that she's not from? And the answer is simple. It's because she was displaced and put there. And then there was really not much else that you could do, because overnight you became a refugee. So my family in Adlid, they owned businesses and they worked part of the train. Like my great-grandpa was a train conductor, and he would go from country to country on these beautiful journeys, and then he would come back to Adlid. And Adlid was known for that. So it was very much like all of that was just turned upside down overnight because of the Nakba. And some people resorted to Tatreez and learning Tatreez. So back to what I was saying. So unlearning the idea that Tatreez is just for Fallahis or just for a specific type of Palestinians. That's number one. And then number two is when there's Palestinians and I ask them, do you know how to do Tatreez? Does anybody in your family know how to do Tatreez? The most common answer I get is my grandma. My grandma used to do Tatreez. My grandma still does Tatreez. My grandma used to. It's always the grandma. So there's always like a generation removed from Tatreez. And in my case too, my mom doesn't know how to do Tatreez. My amta didn't know how to do Tatreez, even though my teta on my dad's side, she has created so many beautiful pieces and thwab and with her hands. So there's always a generation removed. And then you start to think, this is like the post-Nakba generation. This is the generation that didn't grow up during, like recently after the Nakba, but their parents were survivors of the Nakba. So, and then there's us. Now we're in the diaspora and we have some free time on our hands. And living in the West, honestly, we have a lot of forms of entertainment. Like, it's so easy to just pick up any hobby. But when you do it intentionally and you're like, you know what, I want to learn Tatreez, and you're determined. You're like, I want to go out of my way and go to this workshop and learn Tatreez instead of going to a painting class or ceramics or pottery. And like, don't get me wrong, if you're Khalili, like ceramics and pottery, that still applies to you, right? And other parts of Palestine too. But I mean, like, they're not going to teach you how to paint Khalili ceramics. They're just going to show you how to make a mug or something, right? So for people to intentionally go out of their way and want to learn Tatreez, that's what I'm so happy about. And when people come, they come with the idea that, oh, my grandma used to do it and she created this beautiful dress and I want to do something like that. I always start there. And I always show them pictures from the archives of Palestinian women over the past couple hundred years. And I tell them, like, does anybody in this picture, do any of these women look like they're over the age of 60? Most of the time they're like, most of the time they're 10-year-old girls. They're like 10, 15-year-old, like young women. But for some reason, we have it in our mind that only grandmas do Tatreez, and it's a grandma activity, and it's like my grandma used to do this and this, and like, sure, your grandma did it, but why was she able to do it? Because she had two hands. That's it. And you're able to do it because you also have two hands. And that's it. It really doesn't require much else. That, patience, and determination. خلاص. That's your starter pack. You're good. You're good to start, and you're good to go.
Jenin, that is so incredibly powerful, and I just I wish I'm doing snaps. I'm not very good at doing snaps, so I won't do them. But just for everyone listening, pretend I'm doing snaps. I think that's just so powerful, and I love this concept that you're talking about, where you start off with unlearning, which I think is also just really smart in terms of how to approach it. And I have a feeling that everyone who takes your classes is leaving with so much more than they thought they were going to get. And I think that's incredible. So kudos to you on all of the things. I wanted to ask you before, we wrap up a little bit about what you're working on right now. What's going on in both personal and on the teaching side?
So I have a lot of works in progress in terms of Tatreez projects that I've started and just haven't finished. I'm going to get to them. I keep telling myself that, but I genuinely am. I'm doing a lot of things here in the community and a lot of things to educate people about Palestine besides just embroidery and besides just Tatreez, but also through textile. So Majd Alawi fabric, for those who don't know, is some of the most beautiful fabric that's hand woven in Majd Al Askalan, which is in the Gaza region. And last summer when I went to Palestine, I met this lovely, incredible woman named Tamam, and she's an internally displaced khayata. She's a seamstress, and she handmade me dresses. I bought a bunch of Majd Alawi fabric, and I asked her to make them into dresses. And I ended up having other ideas, so I ended up buying Majd Alawi fabric from Al Khalil and having it and taking it to Ramallah so that she could make them into bags. So I have a Majd Alawi collection that just recently came out. And I'm going to be supporting Noel Collective's fundraiser to raise money for the Majd Alawi weaving family that is now displaced in Egypt because of the genocide, to kind of help them get back on their feet and continue to practice the art of weaving, which they've been doing for like generations and generations. And part of the proceeds are also going to go to Tamam herself, because I want to pay her a living wage, which I know we were talking about briefly. Besides just like actual Tatreez, I think a lot of women make a living off of their art, and art is so broad. It includes being a khayyata, being a seamstress, because that really is a labor of love. I bought a sewing machine recently, and it is not for the weak. Like it's not easy, but like honestly, I have a lot of respect for people that do that, like that know how to work a sewing machine alone. Besides that, I'm doing a lot of things here in my community. So I'm teaching a class at Newberry Library in Chicago, and it's an 8-week course, and I'm so excited for it. Every single week we focus on a different region in Palestine, and we learn about it, what makes it unique, what makes it special, from so many different angles, like geographically, in terms of like, for example, the weather, the cuisine, the dialect, because there's so many variations and diversity within Palestine, but also in terms of our Tatreez too. And it's not like we're going to be looking at different thwab, but just motifs themselves and then practice them. So everybody that is going to be a part of this, or that is already a part of this, is going to have the opportunity to create a tapestry that is kind of, it's going to be a mix of Palestini motifs. And they're going to, by the end of the class, we're going to end the class by talking about the Gaza region for obvious reasons, through the same, rooted in storytelling through embroidery, and why certain motifs are ascribed to certain regions and cities. There's a story behind all of that. There's always a story behind everything. So just exploring that, and then exploring Palestine through Tatreez for those that have never been, and for those that wish to go back or wish to just visit. I want to give people that opportunity to do so. So I'm really excited for that. And I'm going to be doing a bunch of workshops at Watan Palestine. So for those that don't know, Watan Palestine is an art studio. They're amazing. They're here in the Chicago area. So I'm going to be doing a series of workshops with them over the fall and probably in the winter as well. That's still in the works though. Like the winter stuff, don't worry, the fall stuff is already figured out and taken care of. And then recently, I just launched, and this is the last thing that I'm going to mention, is I'm doing monthly Tatreezitas. So, Lina, you probably understand because you speak Spanish, but cita is it means appointment, but also means date. So they're Tatreez dates. And I just love being able to mix Arabic and Spanish, because I think they're very cute when they're like mixed into like together into one word. So Tatreezita, and also For those that don't know, ita and ito is like a way of, it's a kind of a term of endearment, but a lot of people say it originates from Nahuatl, which is an indigenous language in Mexico. Adding ito and ita brings a lot of love to a word. So it actually means Tatreezita as like Tatreez dates. So every single month we're going to meet up here in Chicago for the people that are local, and we're going to just work on our Tatreez projects and just gather and keep that tradition of Tatreez circles and stitching in community alive. So if anybody's interested in that, all this information is going to be on my website and also on my Instagram, which is Tatreez Jenin, and also my website is tatreezjenin.com. So TatreezJenin.com, and it's the same username as well, just minus the .com. And yeah.
I love that. I love that. Really quick follow-up. So Tatreezita, is that for the Palestinians, or is this also to practice non-Palestinian Tatreez?
You know, I don't want to limit it to anything. So Tatreezita is just like whatever you want to Tatreez, bring it. Regardless of the country that it's from. Ahla wa sahla. It's for everybody.
I love it. I love it. That is awesome. Oh, Jenin, this has been such a pleasure having you on here. One last question before we let you go. Are there any major life lessons, and I know you've mentioned so many, but are there any that come to mind that you've taken from Tatreez?
Absolutely. My first one is to wear your Tatreez. Don't save them for a special occasion. Anybody who's been to my workshop knows that I say this like 1,000 times, and I'm so passionate about it. Don't wait for a special occasion. Today, this very day, you woke up, so that's enough of a special occasion for you to wear your Tatreez. And it doesn't need to be a whole thobe, but even if you have a little coin purse, wear it, flaunt it, like use it, you know? And like being able to wear your Tatreez is very much wearing your identity, especially for Palestinians. So last summer when we went to Palestine, we went to a lid for the first time. I was the first generation of 3 to ever go to a lid. And I told my husband that day, I'm like, if all goes well and we end up in a lid, I'm going to be in a lid wearing Tatreez. And I was wearing a handmade thobe that I bought from Al-Quds from Jerusalem the 2 days before that. And it was a beautiful thobe, and I was walking through these streets that my grandparents grew up in, and on that land that I feel so connected to. And with every step I took and every brick that I saw in the old city of Al-Lid and every palm tree that I saw, it was so beautiful to be able to be there dressed the same way the women were hundreds of years ago. It was such a beautiful feeling internally, but also honestly, you know what? Seeing the settlers' reaction to me wearing Tatreez in Al-Lid, that made them so mad. And you know what? I was happy. I was like, you know what? Stay mad. Because you know what? Similarly, like when I used to see like First Nations people wearing their indigenous clothing in Canada, the first thing I would think is like, I'm not supposed to be here. Like this, I'm not from here. You know, they are dressed the same way their people have been dressing for thousands of years. So it was like kind of just the opposite experience when I was in Al-Lid, and all these settlers were seeing me dressed the same way the women in the archives were. So Tatreez is very much a means to our indigeneity, and these dresses and these Tatreez pieces that we make, they last for centuries, and they last so much longer than whatever oppressor comes and settles illegally on our land. So when we make this art and when we keep it and we, you know, treasure it and pass it down, that's such a huge statement and such a beautiful thing to be able to do and practice, because it is a means of asserting our presence and where we're from, and that itself is a story. So always wear your Tatreez, and like even if it's machine made, it doesn't matter, like wear your Tatreez. And then as you do that, also reflect on the generations before you that practice Tatreez and how you feel connected to them or to the land of Palestine if you're from Palestine, obviously. And then the last 2 points I would say is when you make a mistake, be patient and be merciful to yourself. So I always begin my workshops by saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, because God is the most merciful. How merciful are we to ourselves, especially when we make a mistake? Especially for the beginners. When you make a mistake, do you just like put your Tatreez aside and leave it and let it collect dust for a while? Or do you just like take a deep breath, walk away, get a glass of water, and then come back and sit down and be like, you know what? I'm determined, I'm going to solve this, and I'm going to do it. So just be gentle and be patient to yourself. Have that mercy to yourself when you make a mistake, because even in life, it's so easy to make a mistake, and it's never as easy to fix it. And I'm not just talking about Tatreez. Like, think about the things that you do day to day, right? It's so easy to mess up, but the consequences usually are a lot harder to deal with than the mistake itself and making it. Then the last thing is, with each stitch, practice mindfulness and take a moment to clear your mind. So allow Tatreez to be a form of self-care and reflect on your state of mind and your heart. Reflect on your blessings, whether that's like something like dhikr, which is something that I started doing. So with each stitch, I would say like, Alhamdulillah, Subhanallah. And especially when you do this in nature, it's very beautiful and you feel very connected to the trees and to the sky, and reflecting on your blessings. Even if it's your eyesight, to be able to look at all these beautiful colors that you're stitching in and threading your needle, which is, it's a whole experience by itself, right? Like that requires eyesight and attention and focus, and just be grateful that you have all of these abilities, because like one of my grandmas has arthritis, so she can't practice Tatreez. The other one of my grandma, like her vision isn't that good, so they kind of have FOMO. So, but they live through my hands creating Tatreez. They sit and they watch and they remember how they used to create. So it's very powerful to be able to create Tatreez. So just take that moment to just reflect on that. And lastly, if you can do Tatreez outdoors, do it. There's nothing really quite as healing as like sitting under a tree, getting a breath of fresh air and just doing Tatreez, even if it's for 5 minutes. But please set a timer, set an alarm, because Tatreez is very much addicting. So if you start something and you're like, let me just do one more stitch or one more line, or let me just finish this motif, you're gonna look at the time and be like, oh my god, the sun set. Like the day will fly by when you do Tatreez. So just keep that in mind. So those are just some lessons that I wanted to share. And yeah.
I like that timer tip.
So good. Thank you, Jenin, again so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure. All the vibes have been so good. We will talk to you soon, Jenin. Thank you.
I absolutely loved having Jenin on. She was so fun to like just listen to her stories and listen to her perspective. Like, she just had so many powerful and beautiful things to say. I really love what she was talking about with like how Tatreez has become this kind of like conversation starter for her, you know, whether it was like her family, like her own family members, like random people as she was like stitching outside. But really it seems like it's been a huge conversation starter and a huge bridge for her with you know, her local community in Chicago, her local non-Palestinian Mexican community in Chicago. And it's just really beautiful to hear like these like cross-cultural connections all based on art. Yeah, it was great. And now I am very curious too about like a little bit more about Mexican embroidery, because like I was saying, like, you know, being in California, I popped like, you know, it's pretty easy for us to pop down to Mexico, and every time I go, I'm just so blown away by just the vibrancy of their embroidery. Like, we all know I love me some bright colors, so it's only natural, but all of it was great. I cannot wait to see what else Jenin creates, and to hear more about like her journey as an educator while she does more classes.
No, I love it. I love it. It's also interesting to hear that it's also hard to find resources on Mexican embroidery. Like, there's clearly a need to preserve. I mean, Palestinians, obviously there's a huge urgency. It's quite literal, this threat of erasure. But just in general, these indigenous embroidery art forms are, you know, they're also at risk unless people continue to teach and pass them on. But no, she had such good vibes. It was such a fun conversation, and I loved all her stories. Lots of laughing in between. So good, so good. Thank you guys so much again for listening to Tatreez Talk. We want to hear about your Tatreez journeys, so please share your stories with us at tatreeztalk@gmail.com, and we might have you on an upcoming episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite listening platform, and be sure to leave a 5-star review. You can follow me at Lina Thob and Amani at Minamani, and of course follow the pod at Tatreez Talk. We will talk to you guys soon.